Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Economics Monday on the IBM TV network. I'm Nick Palavito. I'll be your host for today, and we have a really great panel lineup, so we're going to introduce some of our panelists. We'll start off with this gentleman who actually hails from Utah, the former Associate Dean for the University of South Dakota School of Law, also has a JD, LLM, and a doctorate in education. Let's bring in the Honorable Dan Worthington. Dan, welcome back to Economics Monday.
Thanks, Nick.
Okay. And this gentleman also has a law degree, and he went to the University of Miami School of Law, receiving also a master's in business administration from NYU. Let's welcome in Peter Bennett. Peter,
Hi.
Welcome to the show. Okay. And this person is currently unemployed. He's looking for a job, but formerly he was a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund manager till he sold all his hedge funds. Let's bring in from Australia, Shaquille Latimer. Shaquille, welcome to the show.
I'm not looking for a job, I'll just say.
You're not looking for a job.
No, I've decided to act more American and not look for a job.
Okay, right. Well, the thing is, speaking about America, we have this new budget coming up. It's supposed to be passed by the end of this week, okay, which deals with infrastructure and human infrastructure, very important, spending on anywhere between $1 trillion and $3.5 trillion. And this, of course, allows extended unemployment benefits to our friends in Australia who happen to be unemployed. They'll probably pay you guys to sit around and do nothing. So what do you think about this, Peter? How is this going to affect the economy, this new infrastructure budget? What are your thoughts on this?
Let's say, first of all, I don't think it's going to be a big impact either way. I mean, there's so many different forces out there now. Energy prices are going higher, and they'll probably keep going a little higher at least, if not more. Supply chain issues are out there. $2 trillion is probably where they'll wind up roughly, because Manchin will hold the line. And some of the money is going to good purposes like infrastructure. Some of it isn't going to bad purposes, but I think they're talking about now 4 weeks child care, parental leave, which does nothing for the economy, but it's nice for people. But so that money just reduces productivity of companies. Overall, it's not really the strong bill we need, but it's there.
Okay, well, let's go to Dan Worthington, since you're one of the few Americans that are on this panel. Dan, what are your thoughts about this $3.5 trillion, not billion anymore, $1 trillion expenditure, including human infrastructure like pre-K, family medical leave, whatever else program we could put in there that we'd like you to pay for? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the physical infrastructure stuff in the first bill probably been needed for a long time. I think both sides agree on that, and so there has been consensus reached on that. The problem is that the progressives are holding out because they want this pie in the sky $3.5 trillion package that they're not going to get because of conservative senators who have not lost their total marbles like the rest of the Democrats. And so we're going to see some sort of middle number, I think. Still, I think most of the $3.5 billion pork package is just exactly that. It's mostly an entire waste of time, like Peter had mentioned. There are some nice to haves, but there are not so many items that are absolutely necessary. And it really doesn't do a lot for the economy. In fact, most of the policies that this administration I should say all the policies that this administration has employed have been detrimental to the economy, not having a positive impact at all. I mean, look at skyrocketing prices, inflation at the gas pump, in the stores, everywhere else. It ends up being an indirect tax on the American people, ends up hurting the very people the Democrats claim that they want to protect and serve. It does nobody any favors, right? Trucking prices, hauling goods and services, all the interference with the ports because of Democratic policies about trucking and other things. So we're seeing a real huge problem because of the policymakers and the Democratic Party's policies. For example, in California, one of the reasons we're having a tough time getting truckers in to haul the stuff at the ports away is because the Democratic governor has this, and the Democrats in California have this new law in the books that require all the trucks to be electric by a certain date, right? And so a lot of the independent truckers, and the rigs have to be a certain age.
2011.
So all the independent truckers are priced out of the market, and they're the ones that are normally the ones that carry most of those goods, because they don't want to invest in new tech or newer trucks now because they're going to be forced to buy the ones that don't exist in the future. And so, I mean, it's really stupid stuff that we're doing to ourselves because of policies of idiots who pretend to be, rule makers that are just making our lives miserable as American people and creating tremendous shockwaves throughout the economy because of poor policies. And
Dan, I want to add to what you just said before the next person speaks, because I was listening to a story this weekend about the truckers in LA. And so one of the rules in California is you can't have a truck that's older than 2011, which means a lot of trucks can't go there anymore. But what happens with these trucks is they rip them out. They rip them out apart basically every year or so, or even a certain amount of miles. So what they do is, okay, this truck has gone X miles, whatever it is, 6,000, 12,000. They put in a new engine. They put in a new chassis. They put in everything. But if there's any parts that are over 2011, you can't drive into the port, even though they need the trucks there. And then also there's the union aspects of it. They don't want to hire any non-union people. So it's so government sticking their nose in things that they mess up things. And, there's a purpose for government, but at least half the time, I think they make things worse.
Well, let's bring in a person who really loves government. Let's go down under and bring in Shaquille Latler and get his opinion.
Ask Peter a quick question there, because I just wanted to make sure I follow. Does that mean even interstate trucks going into California can't go in unless they adhere to California rules? Or is it only for Californian?
Yeah, I believe that's what the case is, and the Biden administration should step in, but they won't, because they're not hardly doing anything positive. And they should say to California, we're taking it over under the Interstate Commerce Clause, and we have the right to say that you can't regulate the trucks. But so California's saying, I believe all of California, you can't do a 2010 truck on the California roads. That's my interpretation, what I heard, and they certainly can't go to the ports. It's crazy because, again, they rip out trucks. I mean, they rip them apart anyway. It's just an example over and over again of government putting their nose into things where they don't have the right incentives, they don't do the right thing, they don't care, they don't know, whatever the reasons is. They mess things up more than half the time. Sometimes they do great things, and sometimes they do really bad things, but the majority of times they make things worse.
Yeah, exactly.
It sounds a lot like some of the dramas that face the US with transportation under ICC rules, back in the 60s and 70s and earlier, and earlier debates and arguments between the railroads and the truckers. But look, I will say, I'll leave Dan and Peter aghast. I will say, in the defense of the Democrats, I'll do my best here.
What?
So I will say, I think that there is a desire amongst a very big part of the American population to have more social services like they have in Europe. Now, whether or not that is the right or wrong way to go, it is up to the people to decide that themselves. So if the majority of people in America, if that's what they want, then, the country really has to try to provide that. Where I see the biggest issue is not just government providing those services, it's how they're planning on funding it. And as I've said in many previous shows, if you want to be like Denmark, if you want to be like Sweden or Norway or any of those countries, then you're going to have to tax yourselves the same way. And so that means that working class Americans, You know, people that are just working class, blue collar jobs are going to have to get used to paying 50 and 60% tax rates, because that's what happens in the Scandinavian countries, because you're the one getting the extra benefit from that. And you've got an economy of scale. And that's how those countries sustain that. They don't just keep hitting the rich for more and more things. And if you have a look at Sweden, for example, there are a number of things that you can use, certain government bonds and things like that you can use to make sure that you're not going to end up paying 90% in taxes to the government, right? This has been a really important part of European policies for a really long time, and that's how they provide healthcare and things like that. Now, look, there are some downsides. Healthcare, for example, lines can be a lot longer. There's all sorts of drawbacks. But if you're going to go down that path, the path that they seem to be wanting to go down, have the honesty to tax yourselves properly. And this idea of, we don't like pork in politics, so what we're going to do is we're going to stuff this one human infrastructure package full of all this pork and then say, you either vote for all of it or none of it, right? That is so wrong. To me, that is a complete abuse of the congressional process. It's an abuse of the American people. Because the American people may well have said, you know what, we do believe that we should have more funding for broadband in underserved communities, but we don't believe in tree equity. I'm just making stuff up. But, you know what I mean? Like, people should be able to make that choice, and they should be able to debate that on individual items, not just have it stuffed full of all this stuff and then, you know, good luck. That's just a terrible way of doing it.
Shaquille, a couple of points to bring out. First of all, one, what I'm pretty sure this is the case. I've heard of this before. What I think Nancy Pelosi is thinking of, and some of the progressives are, we're going to get killed in 2022 and 2024. We're going to lose power. So, and I see more and more. I've said it. They're going to get slaughtered, probably. I mean, slaughtered. But even today, I read that 1 in 5 Biden voters say they would vote for Trump today. That would mean a landslide election for Trump right now, even if with Trump, and it may be somebody even more likable, you know, although, you know, that's arguable, but they may put up somebody like DeSantis.
Isn't he likable though, Peter?
Well, Trump is hated by some people, loved by some people. You know, I like him. I love his policies mostly. Some of them I think are wrong, but you know, he's not like Ron DeSantis or someone. The Democrats didn't have really any issues to go against him. So just like they painted everybody like, you know, Reagan was lazy and stupid, even though he was really, really bright and personally created the theory that that helped collapse the Berlin Wall. And, you know, Ford was a klutz, even though he was a football player prior. Yep. You know, they just want to tell their narrative. And the only narrative they could get against Trump is he's not likable. And, you know, but they don't want to talk about policy. So, but you know what? If personally, I mean, if you get a guy like DeSantis who goes with all Trump's policies, and Trump may very well now be into tech now with DWAC, and he's launching his own site, that may take up all his time, and he may say, you know what, I have enough influence that way, and I'll support somebody else. So either way, they're going to get killed. They are going to get slaughtered probably in 22, 24. So Pelosi's thinking, this is my main point here, is Pelosi's thinking, and the progressives, we're going to put in as much services and free stuff as possible because it's very hard to take back, which is true. Look at Obamacare. So that's what they're thinking. But the other 2 points you brought out, Shaquille, is one, yeah, people will vote for stuff that they get for free, you know, forever. But that doesn't mean it's the right thing to do, especially when the government has already promised much more than it could afford.
Right.
It's essentially bankrupt 10 times over and so are the other governments around the world because of unfunded liabilities for future Medicare costs and pension costs that they haven't even funded and are massive compared to even the announced deficits. I mean, they're talking about 27 trillion deficit when it's really 100 or 200 trillion easy. And then the only last point is Denmark and Sweden, those two you mentioned, actually have lower corporate rates now in Europe than corporate tax rates in the United States. So who's the socialist in a way?
We are.
And I can tell you that Sweden, if you want to start a business, Sweden is actually quite a good place to go because although they have a lot of regulations, their regulators, and it's very rare that I see any country do this, even within the EU, their regulators will actually work with you to help you to start the business, to help you to comply with all their rules. And if they catch you, breaching some kind of regulation, it's not this sort of gamemanship where a prosecutor will try to ping something on you. They'll actually work in and say, oh, look, we believe that this is, this regulation actually applies to you, etc. And they'll either help you to comply, or they themselves will actually try to get the regulations changed if it's not working the way it's supposed to be. Now, I don't want to try and paint Sweden as being, a perfect utopian country. Every country has its flaws. But Sweden, I think, has done very, very well. And unlike neighbouring Norway, they don't have all of that oil wealth that Norway has. I do want to say, Peter, to me, I kind of look at that speech that Joe Biden did a little while ago where he said, if you haven't been vaccinated yet, what else are you looking for? What numbers do you want to see? And I tend to agree with him. It's everybody's personal decision. But I tend to agree with him that the numbers seem to show that you're going to be pretty safe getting the vaccine and you're going to be better off having taken the vaccine than not having taken it. Well, I'd ask him and the progressives the same question. What do you need to see before you conclude that socialism doesn't work? Tens of millions of people have died in our history trying this. It has led to poverty and just dire circumstances for so many human beings. You've had times before where inflation in the United States was out of control, and every time it's been under socialist or progressive governments. Right now, you've got inflation that is much higher than it should be just coming out of the pandemic. And how do we know that? Because you compare the United States to other advanced economies, and they're not experiencing the same levels of inflation. You've got a shortage of goods. You're not sure if your kids are going to get Christmas presents this year. How come that's not happening in Australia? How come that's not happening in New Zealand or in the UK or anywhere in Europe? It's only happening to the United States. You've got all these issues. You've got people that are dropping out of the workforce, and so therefore they publish that the unemployment rate's gone down, which is totally ridiculous. Okay, so you've got pressures on food prices, inflation just across the board. You're begging Russia and OPEC nations for more oil. You're shutting down your own. I mean, at what point do you look at this and go, it seemed like a good idea at the time. We really thought this would lead us to a better place, but it's not working. It's just not working out. At what point do you come to that conclusion?
I don't know what point we'll come to the conclusion, but let's hear from Canada, Sasha Starr. We haven't heard from our friends in the North, and see what they think about this $3.5 trillion bill and where the U.S. economy is taking the world to.
I'm quite surprised that what I've heard from previous speakers. Shaquille, I think you mentioned Scandinavian countries as an example for U.S. to conduct the tax policies and other economic things. But don't forget that these are 1,000 years old societies, and there is a completely different relationship between members of that society. They're helpful to each other and even to immigrants who are coming to their countries, and it's a completely different set. It's a completely different tone for one that exists in North America, in the US particularly. It's a much younger society, came out of basically English tax evaders, slave owners, and slaves themselves. So how you can compare Scandinavian stock of people to US? There is no comparison whatsoever. So all that dictates many other things.
Well, I think you're being a little unfair there, Sasha.
Oh, yes. I'm so sorry.
No, hang on. The United States has been very welcoming to immigrants. That's why they've got the most amount of immigrants in the world and continue to do so every year. I've been to 25 or 26 states or something. I've always been welcomed into America. Prior to just recently, America looked like a great place to do business if I was ever to start up. So I don't think that that's a fair comparison. And in relation to Scandinavia, I'm not suggesting the United States should actually tax themselves like that, because I don't think that that's a very good way of doing it. But what I'm saying is, if you are going to ask government to provide all these social services, you can't expect the top 20% to pay for the things that are currently already being paid for by the middle class. You can't just shift all of the spending burden upwards, because it doesn't work.
I don't think there's an ideal system that will be loved by everyone. I mean, some people will have a little more advantages than others, and those people will obviously fight the whatever system of taxation you will provide.
You know what? In defense of Americans, by the way, I just happened to read an article this last weekend that said that if you look at charitable donations around the world, Americans actually lead in the amount they give to charitable organizations, and including all the European countries. So, America, and we have open borders. What else could you want?
and conservatives too, Peter. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. It's actually conservatives that donate a lot more to charity than what liberals do.
Oh, good point. Yeah.
And so you have a look at some of the charities that are run by conservative groups and compare it to the monstrosity that is now the Sierra Club, and compare them and see what you think. Nick, you're a long-standing member of this.
You keep attacking my favorite group, the Sierra Club, which backs all the wonderful liberal causes in the United States, including environmental change. But with that, speaking of change, the IBM TV network is now on LinkedIn. So today we're broadcasting not just through YouTube and Facebook as we're creeping into all the social media sites, but also LinkedIn and Twitter. So we just added 2 more sites for what now in terms of the demographics of those sites, I don't know anything about. Also, the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States, will be joining us in about 5 or 6 minutes. So he's going to give us some insights on the economy. And what I find very striking is this $3.5 trillion bill. They're now saying, well, maybe it's going to be $2 trillion. In other words, or maybe it's $1.5 trillion. What impact is that going to have on the economy? You're talking about, I hate to say that, Shaquille, but your entire economy in Australia, this is bigger than your entire economy. Okay, Sasha, this is bigger than your entire economy. Oh, Sasha,
I think it's bigger than both.
This is bigger than both your economies combined. In other words, we're going to spend more than every person who works in your 2 countries make. And we're going to do it in just one bill. That's a huge amount of human infrastructure.
Firstly, let me just say the GDP of Australia is about 1.5 to 2 trillion. The GDP of Canada is about the same, so it's not quite more. But what difference does it make? We have smaller populations. The question is not how much you're spending. It's not like you say, well, I spent more money on that T-shirt than the other guy did, but we got the same T-shirt. It's whether or not the money actually did anything positive or not. And economic theory doesn't change because of what countries we live in. And on that, I'll be back.
Peter, I have one question for you.
Sure.
So a lot of people say what was $3.5 trillion or $1.5 trillion. So it doesn't really matter because the GDP of the United States is well over $20 trillion. So this is really significant and so on. Could be. But my question is, GDP, it's 20 or more $trillion, but this is gross domestic product, of course. And what is the net domestic product? Have you ever thought about that?
Net domestic product? You mean our profit?
You mean after expenses?
Well, there must be, actually, Don, maybe you have an answer. If you have gross domestic product of something, whether it's a country or a corporation or something, there must be a net domestic or company, either it's profit or overall some kind of a figure.
GDP is almost a net. I would say GDP is a net in a way, because let's say you're a manufacturing company. You create a product, a widget. You have to pay for your energy costs, your employee costs, all your costs are coming out. Once you create that product, that's a net product. I guess. I mean,
Peter, but why would you call it gross domestic product? Gross means it's overall.
Right, that's true. You do have energy costs, things like that.
It's products and services and everything else, whatever is there, and it's a gross domestic product. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Right.
it's I would imagine it's an economic of activity of all corporations, people, doctors, lawyers, and just whatever it is there to produce something.
Yeah, but the real question is also, Sasha, does it actually produce something? Okay, since three out of four people sitting here have law degrees and are lawyers, right? And do we really produce anything? And the answer is no, we
Services.
don't. We
But that's
well,
services.
and we
Wait,
produce services, but Peter, there's no
Right.
asset. There's no additional house. We don't produce a condominium. We don't produce a rail line. We don't produce
well, that's
any
true. If
physically
anything, lawyers
tangible
arguably
asset.
hurt the economy
Yeah,
in
arguably
a
they
lot
hurt
of
the
ways.
economy.
No, there's a lot of arguments that there's too many
Yeah.
lawyers in the United States. There's too much lawsuits. It hurts businesses. I mean, you have to pay. Let's say you're running a business, you have to pay for insurance, malpractice insurance. All these are costs. But look, GDP is just one measure. In economics, I think you have to look at all the many measures to get a feel for things. You can't look at just unemployment. You can't look at just GDP. But GDP is an important measure of what you're creating, whether it's just in real products or goods or services, whatever it can't be looked at it in isolation. But here's an interesting point that relates to that you triggered. I just was reading that if you look at funded and unfunded liabilities, again, I'm always on that because it's unbelievable how much the United States and other countries owe, that if you look at it per American taxpayer, and you look at the assets of the taxpayers, and you then divide the unfunded liabilities and funded liabilities. In other words, what I'm really talking about for the audience is Medicare and Social Security that's been promised by this country. And I always have to put the footnote in, every other country in the world is doing the same thing. They have free healthcare. But the point is, if you take the unfunded and funded liabilities and the assets of the taxpayers, it's almost equal today. So it means basically you don't have, if net, you don't have taxpayers.
There is
income.
no net worth in the United States, but we do want to bring in our former Comptroller General of the United States, now with the U.S. Naval Academy. Let's bring in the Honorable David M. Walker. David, welcome back to the Economics Monday on the IBM TV network. Good to have you here. And of course, we're discussing the economy and this new bill that's taking place, which is looks like it's going to be about $3.5 trillion. What we're looking at, or is it going to be less than that? What's the story?
Yeah, well, first, correct the record. I was with the Naval Academy for 2 years, but I'm no longer at the Naval Academy, although they want me to come back.
Okay.
My wife is going to decide that. But in any event, you know how that works, right, guys? Okay.
Yep.
So,
the boss.
Look, originally Bernie wanted $6 trillion and progressives wanted $6 trillion. They allegedly compromised at 3.5. Joe Manchin has said he wouldn't support anything over $1.5 trillion. And by the way, these are over 10-year numbers. Kyrsten Sinema has got a problem with it too, although she's not as vocal about it. There were meetings this weekend at Biden's home in Wilmington between Schumer and Manchin and Biden. And it looks like they're talking about something that would be somewhat less than $2 trillion. Biden wants to try to get something done before he goes off to Europe, which is Thursday. But, we'll see. I mean, the bottom line is they look like they're reducing the number of programs. They're reducing the number of people that would be eligible for the ones that are still in. But they do have on the table now a wealth tax. Which is now on the table. And Kyrsten Sinema still evidently has a problem with some of the proposed tax increases, especially the corporate tax increase. So that's kind of where we are right now. And this is obviously a very big week because it's not just the budget reconciliation, but it's also the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which has already passed the Senate with 19 Republican votes. And should be able to pass the House as well once they take it to the floor.
Mm-hmm.
David, quick question. That wealth tax, I've heard it's like a billionaire's tax. Are they talking about taxing income of billionaires, or are they starting to talk about taxing their assets?
I've heard both.
Wow. That
I've
would
heard
be
both.
a
I've
change in tax.
heard they're talking about incomes of billionaires and they're talking about assets, but obviously the number is much, much higher when you talk about assets versus, versus income. And, as we all know, a lot of these billionaires, I mean, their net worth is based upon their ownership of various enterprises, right?
Right.
And some of that has not been realized yet.
Yes.
But that would force them to realize some of it in order to satisfy these tax obligations.
Well, yeah. And the other problem is that their assets are based on a multiple of a company that they run. It's not like they have the money in the bank. I mean, I think a lot of people don't know that. Tesla is trading at 1,000 times price earnings. Okay, so that artificially inflates Elon Musk's net worth. So all of a sudden, I'm worth 200 billion only because people think that Tesla stock is worth an outrageous multiple. Now, if you tell Elon, okay, come up with the dough, he's going to say, I don't have it. I mean, that's going to be one of the weirdest things. Elon's going to go, I'm broke.
Do you then allow the taxpayer to claim back when the stock price falls? They get to claim back the overtax that they actually paid. I mean, how can you do that?
I'm not sure how this is going to work.
Just on that note, we've got a problem in Australia with with people over retirement age. It's called the deeming rate, and they've set the deeming rate at 3%, but our interest rates are at 50 basis points. So it's unfair because it affects their pensions. Now, if you want to get a risk-free or a relatively risk-free return on your money, and you're in America right now, where are you going to put the money? So even if you were to only put in a 2% wealth tax, how is a person going to generate 2%? They may not be able to do that. There's nowhere safe for them to do it. So they're going to have to take on more risks than they may otherwise be prepared to take.
Or you're going to be forced to sell the shares of your stock. Okay. And the thing is, there's two big problems here. One is valuation.
Sorry, what? You're assuming that all these billionaires are just the major stockholders of big companies. What if I own a vineyard? What if I own 5,000 hectares of farmland that's worth $200 million? What am I doing? This is what they did in the UK, and have a look at all those beautiful aristocratic stately homes. They've all now been taken over by foreign companies that don't have to pay the estate taxes in the UK. And all these families that have had these homes for 500, 600 years have lost those homes because they couldn't generate the income. And the royal family, by the way, written into the tax code, they're exempt from those taxes because there is no way that they can pay it.
They can't afford it.
That's an issue you have with a lot of family farms, right? And of course, most of the agriculture in the United States today is not done by family farms. It's done by agribusiness concerns, if you will. But look, there are lots of practical implementation problems with regard to a wealth tax. But from a political standpoint, there's not a whole lot of Americans that have a lot of sympathy for billionaires.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah,
So
I think, listen, I'm mixed, but, I don't like Democrats. I don't like a lot of Republican things too. But, I think billionaires should pay more. I have no problem with that. But a wealth tax is a different thing because then it's very distorting. How do you measure it? You have to sell shares. But, if they just do a higher rate on over, X dollars, I don't have a problem with it. These people can afford to pay more, obviously.
Yeah.
Although you have to be careful, but look, let me tell you the thing I get more concerned about. The thing I get more concerned about that would affect a lot more than billionaires is any attempt to tax unrealized gains from investments. And there's some people talking about that. Now, believe me, all hell would break loose if they did.
Oh,
that.
yeah, no, that'd be crazy.
Yeah.
That would disrupt the whole economy because you have so many
exactly
people.
Right.
People would have to give up control of their companies.
That should be unconstitutional, actually.
Yeah.
Really? Tax?
I don't think it's going to happen, but when people start talking like that, that's when you really know we got some wackos.
Right.
Yeah, well, we do have wackos.
It would be far easier to introduce a federal, essentially a federal consumption tax. That would be a far easier thing to do. If you have a look at the way that non-doms are taxed in the UK, anything held outside of the UK is not taxed until it's remitted into the UK, and then you're just going to end up being taxed at the highest marginal rate. Now, rather than forcing billionaires to keep their assets offshore, what you would simply do is allow them to have their assets, but anything that they transfer in to make new investments or to do anything else on would be subject to a tax. That would be a far cleaner way than trying to arbitrarily value their assets and then put on a wealth tax. It doesn't work. They've tried this before. I don't know about the United States, but elsewhere they've tried it before. It just hasn't worked. So
Well,
I'm not sure why they want to keep up with ideas that don't work. It
well,
doesn't
the
make
truth-
sense.
And the truth is that from an economic standpoint, a consumption tax is a lot more efficient than anything, frankly, than what we have right now. Okay, I mean, we've got problems with our tax code now because wealthy people don't make their money through wages. All right, I mean, wealthy people make their money through investments. Okay,
It's true.
and it depends on how you invest, right? I mean, what if used to be for a long time that people would invest in municipal bonds, which don't get taxed at all. Okay, if it's municipal bonds for your own state municipality, they'll get taxed at federal level, state level, local level. Now you have a lot of insurance products, which people are investing in. I mean, so that if you have money, there are ways that you can end up using the laws to minimize your taxable income, and I think that's something that people need to take a look at. I agree, billionaires ought to be paying more, but you
I
need
don't
to
agree.
figure out how to do it in a way that it can't be evaded either. Or
I don't agree. I think that we should stop attacking our most successful people and turn them into the sort of pariahs so that AOC gets to go to the New York Met. I've never been to the New York Met. I can afford a ticket. But if I did go there, I wouldn't wear a white suit that says tax the rich on the back of it at a $30,000 a ticket event. I mean, this idea of just continually complaining about the rich as if somehow they have sucked out the economic value of the United States and kept it for themselves. The people who have been the industrialists and the most entrepreneurial people in America, they're the ones that have built America. And for each billionaire that you see, there's probably 100,000 people before them that tried something, that tried a business and failed, that didn't work. There's people out there that have borrowed money against their houses and have lost their house because their business didn't work. So to just look at the cream of the crop, the people that actually made it, and then somehow blame them as if somehow their wealth it comes at the deprivation of the poor.
No, you're totally
I agree with you, but understand this. You have politicians out there saying that they don't want to raise taxes on people making, less than $400,000 a year, which, by the way, is BS. They are raising taxes on people making less than $400,000 a year because when you're talking about raising energy taxes, as an example, that's a regressive tax. Okay, or if you talk about raising payroll taxes, that's a very regressive tax. All right. The problem is that we're in a hole, and the hole's getting deeper. Okay, you can't solve your problem by demonizing the rich. I agree; they've helped to make this country successful, but you can't. So they're trying to figure out what they can do that is politically attractive, that is consistent with their campaign promises, which, quite frankly, don't add up.
But Dave, it's very easy, I think, to say to someone like they talk about, medical care, for example. Okay, now I get it. If people can't afford medical care, that would be horrible. I'm lucky enough to have never lived in a country where you have to pay for it. Right? It's all done through Medicare or some other program like
through taxes. Yeah,
through taxes. Right? Now, I can understand if people are needing medical care, they're not getting it. That would be a problem. However, there is some medical care that is already paid for, but let's just talk about the middle class. We'll forget about the poor for a minute. There is some medical care that is already paid for by the middle class. The idea that you're going to move the expenditure from the middle class up to the top 20% to get them to pay for something the middle class is already paying for, give them a tax break, that doesn't help the poor. All it does is move the expenditure up. So, there's going to be consequences to that. There's consequences that are much more difficult to measure.
Part of the problem is, right.
I have conversations.
Part of the problem with a lot of these new programs.
We talk about what countries we should look at investing into. Now, prior to COVID, we were talking about the United States. Now we look at it and go, I'm not sure that the US is such a good idea for us to start businesses. Maybe we should look at other nations. You can't measure the cost of what people didn't do because of political mismanagement in the United States. You can't measure the ideas that people never tried because there was too many regulations and it was too difficult to do. And Elon Musk and a few of the other billionaires talked about this recently with John Stossel, where they said, look, if government just got out of the way, we would build the train lines. We would build all these stuff that they want. but we can't do it because of over-government regulation. And then for the thanks that they get for that is they get made out to be the pariahs of society and taxed even more.
Well, Shaquille, you're 90% right. I mean, first of all, Tony Robbins always says you create wealth by creating results for people, basically. That's what these people have done. Amazon's amazing. Google's amazing. Even the robber barons 50 years ago, they created the train lines. They created the, telephone system, the power system. They're great people. And nobody's saying that they should be pariahs, first of all, which is crazy for the Democrats to take that approach. But on the other side, and all I'm saying, and many people are saying, they could pay a little more. I'm not saying 90% or 80 or even 60, but maybe they could pay 45 or 50, somewhere in there. But at some point it gets ridiculous. And you're right too, that even if they tax these people 100%, it's not going to make a dent in the government's debt. And what they'll do is waste the money or not use it on productive purposes. They should raise that and just use that towards Medicare. But then they need to find a lot of other solutions anyway.
But here's part of the problem. The problem is not just on the revenue side, okay? And what we're talking about, billionaires and what do you do with billionaires? And, the problem is also, how do you define the poor? A lot of these programs that they're talking about adding, they don't define the poor based upon the poverty rate. They define the poor based upon multiples of the poverty rate.
Wow.
All right.
Yeah,
In addition, in certain circumstances, let's say childcare, there could be an impediment for people to go to work because of the cost of childcare. But maybe you ought to require them to go to work if you're going to get the financial subsidy for childcare, right? I mean, so what we're doing is we don't even define. We need a social safety net. No ifs, ands, or buts. We need to help people that are poor. We need to help people that are disabled. We need to do that. But we've expanded those definitions to where you're well into the middle class and where government is assuming more and more responsibility for the economy, where more and more people are dependent upon government, and government can't run things economically, efficiently, and effectively as a private sector. Bottom line.
Let me ask you a question, please. We struggled a little bit with that before you just came up. So the discussion was that whether it's $3.5 trillion or 1.5 or 2, whatever, it doesn't really matter because gross domestic product of the United States is well over $20 trillion. So this is really nothing. We had a discussion and it's sort of unresolved. What exactly is gross domestic product? And if there is such thing, there must be a net domestic product. Or how would you wage this question?
Well, there's a big debate between the GDP and the GNP and things of that nature, measuring goods and services, if you will. And I agree with what was said earlier, that you just can't go with one metric. You need to look at multiple metrics and if you will. And so I don't know where you want me to go with that.
Nowhere.
See, David, one issue that I have, like in the bill, they have this Family Leave Act, which is like 4 weeks of paid.
Was 12, now they're talking 4.
Oh, whatever. Okay, but here's the problem that I have, and this is the representation I see in the government. They only think in terms of the federal government and big corporations. What about people like me? I work for myself. I've been unemployed for 37 years, longer than Shaquille has. Okay, I've had my own company for 37 years or series of companies. Who pays my leave? Okay. Nobody. Okay. But wait a minute. That's 50% of our population own their own businesses or work in small businesses. So what you're telling me, Dave, is that I get to pay in so that government employees and large corporations can take a month off when they have a kid, but I don't. I
pretty much got it. You pretty much got it.
What?
You pretty much have it.
No, I pretty much have it. I know, because I really object to the thinking in Washington, D.C. that everybody works for a big company or the big government, and half of our population doesn't, and we're the ones who take it on the shorts all the time when bills like this get passed. In other words, we're going to give out free benefits to large corporations and government employees, and you, the small business owner, get to pay for it.
Oh, Nick,
Am I-
stop whining. Stop whining.
I'm just, I really shouldn't complain.
That's what happens when you have
Pretty well
overregulation.
off, but-
I just want to address something that Peter said about billionaires.
Yeah.
Maybe they should pay a bit more. Now, I can't give you the exact number of billionaires and what they pay, but I can certainly say that the top 1% of America, if you actually have a look at their effective tax rate, they paid about 27%. So if billionaires were required to pay 45% or there, they're paying almost double what the effective rate would be. I think it would be a far more useful conversation to talk about what percentage of the GDP should be taken in taxes by the government and spent on people's behalf. In Europe, the average is about 33%. In Australia, it's at 28%. United States, it's at 25%. That's really what I think the conversation should be. What percentage of roughly, approximately what percentage of the GDP should government be actually spending? And then how do you raise it? And I think that the truth of the matter is always going to be, we know that there is a disproportionate amount paid by the top 1%, top 10% of the country pays almost all of the taxes. What we really need to know is if we're going to provide more services, who pays for it? I think it's fair to have a bit of a subsidy from the top, but everybody has to pay into the system that everybody's going to benefit from.
Well, Shaquille, I totally agree.
If you are receiving government benefits, you should have to work for it.
Shaquille, exactly what I was saying is basically, and you're right. You're highlighting the point that this is not going to solve anything. Doing it, they should do it because they can contribute a little more. But this is 1% of the problem. But now, if you do what you say, now let's take 10 years out and 20 years out with Medicare. And here's the problem: what happens when the liabilities are bigger than the GDP? And I haven't even forecast this, but given the fact that the U.S. government probably owes 150 or 200 trillion unfunded liabilities, maybe 100 trillion at least, and governments around the world, because they've all promised free health care for populations over 65, what's it going to look like in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years when the GDP can't even pay? Even if you tax 100%, you may not be able to pay for the Medicare and the pension benefits.
Here's part of the problem.
happens?
We need to define some of these metrics. Okay. First, let me give you a few numbers. All right. The total liabilities and unfunded promises, including Social Security and Medicare, on a discounted present value dollar basis, based on the latest financial statements of the U.S. government, which is September 30, 2020. That's just only the federal level, not state and local, just federal. 104 trillion. All right. Compare that to GDP, about 22 trillion. Compare that to the number of individuals who pay income tax. Because keep in mind, 40% of individual tax filers pay no income tax, and 20% of individual tax filers get tax rebates through the earned income tax credit, child care tax credit, and refundable tax credit. It's 1.4 million per federal income taxpayer. Now, how does that compare to median household income? Median household income is about $67,000 a year. All right. And these numbers are growing faster than the economy and much faster than real wages. All right. The other thing is you talk about, well, government should not, tax more than X percent. Well, how much is the government going to spend? Because the problem we have right now is we're spending a lot more than we tax. All right. We're spending a lot more than we tax. And by the way, the numbers we're talking about are just the federal government. You got to add state and local government on top of that. And that's one of the problems I have is when you do international comparisons, a lot of times people are comparing apples and oranges. You have to add all levels of government.
David, please, I would like to ask you something. Just a while ago, I've heard interview with Warren Buffett on CNBC, and he was asked a question that with all these liabilities in U.S., even with growing debt level, so what will happen? Aren't you scared that U.S. will have to declare a bankruptcy? And Warren Buffett replied, absolutely not. Cannot be. The only country in the world that can print US dollars will ever declare bankruptcy. So it's a kind of a vicious cycle, and there is no exit from this situation. The debt will keep growing, the liabilities will keep growing, but it doesn't matter at the end of the day because there is abundance of US dollars, and if they're now trying to get extra $2 trillion or $3.5 trillion, or even $10 trillion.
Then what's the dollar? What's the dollar going to be worth? What's the impact going to be on inflation? What's the impact going to be with? The question is,
David, dollar is going higher and higher and higher. It doesn't matter what the debt level.
I'll tell you one thing I've been saying in Modern Investing with Sasha every Wednesday, our show. I've been saying this for years now, for as long as I've been on the show and before that, but it's clearer and clearer to me. If you look at a 40-year trend in treasury rates, it's been straight down almost. It went down a little extra in COVID. Now it's going to come up a little. The market might get scared of higher rates, but in the long run, where we're heading is zero rates. Why? Because the government cannot afford to pay interest rates on the 100 trillion. So plus maybe 200 trillion, by the way. I think, David, some people argue 100.
It's a 75-year number. It's a 75-year number. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's an estimate. A lot of times government estimates are higher.
That's
but
right.
let's say it's 150 trillion, counting the 27 that they already have on the books. So the government can't possibly want to pay interest rates on this. And they've used yield curve control many times before, which is basically saying they did this for 11 years during World War II. And so what happens is the government says anything over a certain rate, like let's say they did it before 2%, they buy every bond over 2%. They're already buying most of the bonds. So what's going to happen is they're going to say anything over a little rate, we're going to buy to keep rates phenomenally low, which means, though, the economy is going to stall because the stock market will keep going up for the next few years, getting ready for the zero rates when you can't get any returns on your money. And housing prices are going to soar because we're going to have zero rates and you can buy a lot of house for your money. So there's going to be a lot of impacts. Energy will probably soar because Saudis are going to say, we want more dollars. So it's going to hurt the economy in many ways. And in the end, it's like printing money because that's going to be what they'll be doing. Now, if you play Monopoly and you start giving people $500 or $1,000 to go around, I've tried this, the prices of housing goes through the roof. It distorts the economy. So it's going to be very hard for people to be retired. And the last point I bring out, here's a really interesting point. After World War II, we stimulated the economy. I just read this, that in 1947, real rates were 2% and inflation was 20%. Now, I don't think we're going to have that. But you know what? Let's say inflation is 5 or 6 or 4 even or 3, and rates are at half. People aren't going to be able to keep up, and it's going to really hurt the population. Young people won't be able to make money, and old people are going to have trouble with their budgets.
I'll give you another very interesting example about abundance of US dollars, and not only US dollars, but obviously all the assets in the hands of the population of the United States. Nick, you were saying before that Tesla is trading at 1,000 times earnings?
Maybe 1,500 times earnings.
But you said the word earnings. What if I will tell you about the company which shares are approaching $100 a share, which has no such thing as earnings whatsoever and will not have any earnings in the next at least a year. The name of the company is, by the way, Digital World Acquisition Corporation. Trading now almost $100 a share.
I bought into that last week. I was going to talk to you about it on the show, but I got in at about 70. Because look, it's Trump's new venture to move into tech. I think it's going to be called the Truth Network. But they'll be able potentially, see if you look at the expected value on that, you've got, potentially they could become a Google or a Twitter, and if you moved tens or 100 million people over there, it's going to be worth a lot. So it's worth a speculative investment. I put only 1/3% in there, but I'm figuring, look, it could go to zero, but if they do moderately well, it's worth what it is today easily. But the other side is it could turn into a value. If it turns into a valuation like Google, you could make 500 or 1,000 times your money. So I figure, you know what, 1/3%, let's see let it ride.
Peter, but you realize there are so many Trump supporters. All of them are definitely buying stock. I want to tell you one thing. If it wouldn't be for short sellers, the stock would be today $1,000 a share or more. But because of the professional short sellers, the stock is still around $100.
Which stock? Which stock, Joshua?
It's the same, GWAC.
Oh, you're saying that. Well, I read that for every seller last week there were 3 buyers. So
That's why the stock went from $10 to
yeah, it's
$100.
because it's a new news. You know,
Absolutely.
again, people are looking at, you know, if you have a meme stock like GameStop or Stop or something like that, where it's like or Bitcoin, which I think has no fundamentals at all behind it, and here's a real chance for a meme stock that would be potentially a real Google in 10 or 20 years.
Peter, I just want to address something you said about the about Treasury. So I was thinking about this a lot since we spoke about it, you know, a few sessions ago, and I thought, you know, I can't see the US ever going negative, but I don't see any reason why the Fed can't buy Treasury notes to such a price that the effective yield is negative.
Yeah.
And that's a really, to me, that's a really scary proposition because, you know, back when they were developing the system under the Bretton Woods rules, there was this real concern that Treasury would just keep printing out or keep issuing bonds or Treasury notes, and the Fed would just keep buying it, and then, you know, it would just cause this vicious cycle. And my concern is that we probably will be, you know, getting into that kind of path. Now, Dave, I'm not sure if it was your book or somebody else's book where I read this, where if you have inflation that's 2% above where you're expecting it to be, that over a 30 or 40 year period of time, that means that a $500,000 house would be, get this, $30 million to buy. And that a person would be earning, the average wage in the United States would be like $3 or $4 million a year. You know, the real issue with that is that means that, you know, if I have children, you know, in the near future and they don't have kids until they're my age, they're going to be looking for $30 million, you know, to buy their first home. You know, if we think that college degrees are expensive now, you know, they'll be coming out with a $15 million degree from a college, from a community college. I mean, this is not good. And whilst it might sound like funny to us now, like, oh, that could possibly happen. If you look back,
it's very real.
It's very real.
Shaquille, first 2 points you make, which are key. One, a lot of the world is negative now. I believe Germany is negative. A lot of Europe is negative. They're doing it already to stimulate their economy because they have too much debt. It's already happened around the world. The United States is more of an exception where you can get good returns on your money in terms of good, meaning 2%. Yeah, exactly. That was pitiful, you know, even a year or two ago. But the point is that's why you need to invest in real assets first of all. You know, because if there is real inflation, look, it's not going to be 6%, 8% a year because the economy can't take it. But let's say you get 4% or 5% a year, which could happen for a long time, or even 3%. It's going to eat away at people's wealth, and it's going to keep compounding. And you're not.
I don't think you can say it can't take it. It did back in the 70s, right? Look at how high inflation rates were.
Yeah, I know it took it for a while, but there were also a lot of different. It's a different world now because technology is going to keep inflation down to a point. And there's a lot of other factors. Energy was a big factor in that huge inflation boom. Now we use energy, but we use it as a smaller percentage of our GDP. So there's a lot of factors that will probably keep down. Our economy can't take those rates. Listen, if rates go up, mortgages go up. If mortgages rates go up, the housing prices go down. And then you don't have any more building, and you have a collapse of the service-based economy. So it's not going to happen. But the thing is, the most important thing for viewers, you better not have 100% of your money in CDs or bonds because, if
you're going to lose purchasing power.
You better have some REITs. You better have some real estate. You better have some gold. You know, I only have 3% there, but I'm just saying you spread it around, but you want some real assets. You can't just put it in the bank or have a
Peter, don't forget about Bitcoins, okay?
Okay, right. And that'll be on Media Monday. But we're at the hour, and I'm going to have to thank our panelists, Dan Worthington, the former Associate Dean of the University of South Dakota School of Law, Peter Bennett, who's with Modern Investing, who's also has a JD MBA. Shaquille Latmore, a former multi-billion-dollar hedge fund manager. Sasha Starr, the star of Modern Investing, and the Honorable David M. Walker, former Comptroller General of the United States. And thank our new partners, Twitch and LinkedIn, who we're broadcasting on now. I did check that. And we will see you next week on Media Monday on the IBM TV network. So with that, we're going to wrap up for this week. And next week, I'm sure they're going to be messing with the economy again. Something's going to happen. Okay.
Probably.
Something's going to happen in Washington, D.C. We'll know next week.
So